Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with hosts Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please subscribe and share so you will never miss an episode. Android users can find us and subscribe on your Play Music app. Apple users can find us and subscribe on Apple Podcasts. You can find us on Stitcher. You can follow us on Spreaker. And you can find the podcasts on jimmyhinton.org or findingahealingplace.com. Please rate our show, subscribe, and share so that we can spread the word. Let's get into the show. Welcome to this week's episode of the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with Jimmy Hinton.
And Jimmy's mom, Clara.
And we sound a little bit nasally today. We're both fighting colds. We had how many people? Somebody counted 41 at your house at one point.
41 people together over the holidays, yes.
So we were passing all kinds of interesting bugs. But lo and behold, we are here. We're back, and it's just good to be with our audience again. Okay, so today we're going to kick off the new year, and we wanted to do a review of 2018. I think hands down was the most active year, certainly in my lifetime, as it relates to abuse and exposure and all that
stuff.
Without
doubt. There's not a day, excuse me, that goes by that we don't read or hear of something happening in that arena. And that was not that way even 2 years ago.
Nope. Yeah, you and I we've been hard at it, really since the end of 2011.
Right.
Whenever we first discovered about my dad, I pretty much started immediately training people, blogging about it. Right. I think you started blogging the next year.
Within a year I started.
But, you know, we've been at this since 2011, and I've never seen anything like what happened this last year in 2018.
I mean, when we started, Jimmy, we were pretty much the only people talking about it that we could find.
Yeah, there weren't very many. There were
a couple. But
very few bloggers.
Isolated,
on this subject. Yeah. Now you have quite a few.
Which is wonderful.
We're seeing more and more people that are joining the advocacy, and we've met some phenomenal people this year.
We sure have. It's been wonderful.
So we wanted to do a year in review and highlight just some of the things. These are just things that I can think of off the top of my head. I know that there are a lot more, but these are just ones off the top of my head. So I'm just going to run through them really quick just to refresh your memory. In case you feel discouraged or like, you know, we're not making a lot of progress, I think this is a good reminder that 2018 saw tremendous progress.
Absolutely.
Tremendous progress.
Sure did.
So we had, beginning in the very first part of January, it was the Larry Nassar sentencing in Lansing, Michigan. And now there are over 300 survivors, victims of Larry Nassar's who have come forward. And that's publicly by name. That's unprecedented.
You know what, I want to interject something real quickly.
Go for
you know what I think is awesome? Larry Nassar, of course, is a powerful person. Very powerful, very, was respected and all that. But what is blowing me away in such a positive way is the victims are being believed. They're being heard and they're being believed. And I am so thankful for that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, we have the same month, Jules Woodson came public and outed her abuser, Andy Savage, pastor at High Point Church in Memphis. Andy Savage has since been removed, along with Chris Conley. I think Chris Conley was the lead pastor and Andy was associate or something like that. But anyway, both of them were removed from High Point. And of course, we interviewed Jules and have gotten to be friends with Jules, and I still keep in touch with her.
Precious, who worked hard for this moment.
Absolutely. So she really became the Well, a lot of people say she became the face of #Church2. And in a very big way, I think that's accurate. February of this year, Hare Thomas, who is a pastor here in Pennsylvania, and also the founder of the biggest Christian music gathering, I guess you call it. It's an annual thing called the Creation Festivals, and it's held here in Pennsylvania. I've actually been to Creation before. He was sentenced in February to 18 years in prison for sexual contact with minors. You have Bill Hybels of Willow Creek Church. He was accused by Pat Baranowski, and when Pat came forward, several other victims came forward and said that he had been sexually abusing them for years. He took an early retirement, quote unquote. Not quote unquote, it's what he did.
Right.
Little weasel. Pardon my French, but he denied all the allegations.
Right.
And there's now an ongoing investigation into Willow Creek Church that's supposed to wrap up, I think, this month. So they launched an investigation to find out if he had more victims, if there were, was a culture of cover-up.
Right.
Who knows what that investigation is going to uncover. So as a result of Pat Baranowski coming forward, lead pastor Heather Larson and all the elders at Willow Creek resigned in 2018.
Which is huge.
That's very big.
Once again, that's huge.
Yeah.
That wasn't anything small. The scales were tilted.
Yes.
They tilted.
Absolutely.
Right.
In August, you had the Pennsylvania grand jury report into 6 Catholic dioceses was released. It named 300 priests and over 1,000 victims. I actually read, it's over 800 pages. I've read it cover to cover. And Mom and I have had the high honor and privilege of meeting many of the survivors from the grand jury report.
They are incredible people. Absolutely incredible. Sweet. Working real hard to get legislation changed. They're amazing. And this was
phenomenal. They are.
This event was watched throughout the entire world, not just Pennsylvania.
Well, I really think, from talking to Sean Doherty and, of course, Sean's just been a leading voice here in Pennsylvania, and I think really beyond nationally, I think even globally.
Right.
Sean's just
that's what I mean. This has been...
Sean's been a leading voice, and, of course, I had the honor. I don't remember where you were. I think you were out of town.
I was out of town.
Or out of state or something, but I had interviewed Sean.
Out of state, yeah.
And if you haven't listened to that podcast, go back and listen to it. It was really, really good. Sean he's an incredible guy, but I don't think they had any dream, even in August.
No.
That
what would happen? No.
I mean, think about that. August wasn't that long ago.
I know. Yep.
And I look at that, and I remember talking to Sean, and he thought it was going to be a big accomplishment just to get this grand jury report published.
Right.
Because if you remember, it was held up in court. The Catholic Church blocked it.
Everybody was chewing on their
it was supposed to be released, I think, back in. I want to say it was supposed to be released in June originally.
It was
and then
either late spring or early.
And then the Catholic Church blocked it.
Right.
They brought it to the PA Supreme Court, and they had it held up there until it was August, whenever it finally got released. When that grand jury report got released, we just saw this tremendous. It wasn't a snowball; it was an avalanche.
Oh, yeah, it was.
Just globally.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So you had, another one, Siobhan O'Connor. She is a whistleblower in Buffalo, New York. She uncovered just a tremendous cover-up in the diocese, Buffalo diocese, evidencing that the bishop not only knew of abuse, but he was covering it up for years, and of course passing the trash, so to speak, taking priests and passing them from place to place.
Jimmy and I spoke before this podcast, And I'll say it here publicly, it still blows my mind to think of anyone, priest or not, covering up something like this. Covering up abuse. I'm not sure how that person can lay their head down at night and fall asleep. I don't get it.
Yep.
And I don't think I will ever get it. I really don't. But what's wonderful is the truth is being exposed, and it's an awesome thing. And I think that's part of why you and I wanted this podcast today, as a bit of encouragement to everybody. Keep on keeping on.
Yeah.
Keep on.
Yep. And I think too, something tremendous that's happened is all these people in these high positions of power, which really is antithetical to the gospel. I'd heard Boz Tchividjian talk about this, where he said Jesus flipped power structures on its head, and he said, whoever wants to be the greatest in the kingdom needs to be a servant of all.
Right.
Jesus was a servant.
Least, yes.
He wasn't about power and position and prestige and all these mega church pastors they're just selling bukus of books. And, James McDonald, who I'm going to talk about later on in this podcast, he's living in some people estimate it's a $4.5 to $5 million home mansion.
Well, that's what I mean. Taking money from people, from parishioners.
Oh, yeah.
And like I say, I don't get it, except money becomes the God. Money and power becomes the God.
Yeah.
And that God is being thrown to the wind.
Yeah. Well, I think even, you look at even the Pope, who, he, if anybody has ultimate protection, he is the definition of too big to fail.
Yeah.
Just this past year, there are people calling for his resignation. There are people protesting and all over the world.
Never did I think I'd live to see that day. Never.
I know.
Never.
So I think these people are learning that they don't have the power that they think they have.
Right.
And that's a good thing. So we also have 14 state attorneys general, as well as the District of Columbia, have open investigations currently into the Catholic Church. There was a big raid into one of the dioceses, or archdioceses in Texas by the Texas Rangers. I don't know if you saw that.
I didn't.
It was on national news. They went in and they raided the church. They had it surrounded, and
I did.
They went in one day,
I'll have to look that up.
Yeah, that was, I don't know, a couple months ago. Also, there was a federal probe that was launched in Philadelphia into the Catholic Church, which is likely to prompt a national probe on the federal level. You have Paige Patterson, who was fired from Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. He was on record multiple times bragging about telling domestic violence victims to stay with their abusive husbands, and also failed to report a rape. He, at first, I think they removed him and were trying to frame it as a resignation, and they were going to give him full retirement benefits, but then eventually the board came back and they said, no, we're firing him and we're taking away all of his retirement.
Which is how it should be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Paige Patterson was just so arrogant throughout that whole process. Also in 2018, there was For Such a Time as This rally that was held in Dallas outside of the Southern Baptist Convention annual meeting. They were decrying injustices done to women in the SBC churches. Our friend Mary DeMuth spoke there.
Yes.
Ashley Easter spoke there. And they just had a really good turnout. And I think that was just a super positive, just great group of people.
Very precious.
I think when you think of protests, I think a lot of times you think
anger, violence.
People
this was not
burning things, they were. I listened to both Ashley and Mary, and they just were so well spoken and they were great. Yes, they were wonderful. Also in 2018, you had Bill Cosby, who was sentenced 3 to 10 years. He is in state prison here in Pennsylvania.
And I think that was pivotal for a lot of people, because Bill Cosby was the epitome of Mr. Funny Family Man. And
not only on screen, but off screen.
Yeah.
He went around.
That's what I mean.
Part of his public persona was to speak
he did lots of stuff.
Accountability into the black communities across the United States, and to call parents to step up and to parent their children well, and to lead the way in changing the culture within some of the broken black communities.
He couldn't lie his way out of this.
No,
he could not.
And if you watched him,
his way out of
man, throughout this process, he was so arrogant.
He
too.
was terrible.
And his true colors really were revealed.
Just awful. But that was, for me, that was one of the most crucial things to see, because he touches a whole community of other people.
Yeah.
And the after effects are still, they haven't even begun happening, I don't think.
No. So, yeah, we had Bill Cosby. We had the Kavanaugh hearing. I think we can't underestimate that. That was, of course, that was very politically charged. But the accuser, Dr. Blasey Ford, went to D.C. and she testified for several days. And I think that was a really big thing. The world was watching. You had John MacArthur at the Masters University. Masters University was put on probation by an accrediting agency because they uncovered a culture of verbal abuse and abuse cover-ups. And if you remember the Masters University, I was telling you right before we recorded, that was in 2017 when we first started getting some national ripple effects. There was a story about Jane Doe, who was raped at the Masters Seminary.
Right.
That's John MacArthur's link to the Masters University. But that was, I'm going to say that was August of 2017 when that story broke. And, yeah, I think that's right. I'm racking my brain right now. I think that was August.
Your timeline is right.
So that was August of 2017. The Jane Doe story breaks of this rape that happened on the Masters Seminary campus, and John MacArthur himself was involved in that cover-up. And of course, that sparked a lot of conversation and outrage and things like that. And so fast forward to 2018, 1 year later, John MacArthur's Masters University is, they're on probation. They're put on probation. That's huge. That's a big deal.
Enormous.
And they published a report. I read parts of that report.
It's huge because for a while, MacArthur University was associated with being flawless, pure, flawless.
Well, John MacArthur is kind of the gold standard for, for integrity and for, the guy's 79 years old.
Right.
And
without a mark.
With an impeccable record.
Yes. Right.
And you start looking at some of this stuff and you find that there's this culture within the SBC churches where there's just abuse from the highest levels, and verbal abuse and spiritual abuse and sexual abuse cover-ups. And
I still say it goes back to the power and the money. You can pretty much trace it back to that, which is sad. Very, very sad.
I mentioned James MacDonald. So James MacDonald, the founder of Harvest Bible Chapel, sued several bloggers and their wives for defamation. And everybody is writing and blogging about that and saying that's kind of interesting that he didn't just sue the bloggers. He went and sued their wives, too, and named them by name in the lawsuit.
Interesting, yeah.
So one of the people sued was Julie Roys over at The World magazine, and she was basically put on gag for a while because of this lawsuit. So she won the lawsuit. And, it was found that she was protected under the First Amendment free speech rights. So, interestingly, on December 13th, which was the same day as the Wheaton College's GC2 Summit, which was not without a lot of controversy, Julie Roys publishes her article about James MacDonald in Harvest Bible Chapel called Hard Times at Harvest. I read that article, and she's written a couple since then. And I think she did a really good job exposing how deep this corruption goes and how abusive James MacDonald is, along with other staff members. And there's just this culture of horrible abuse at Harvest. And of course, at Harvest, they had a youth minister, and I can't remember the guy's name, but he was arrested this year for having sex with multiple male victims in the youth group. And Harvest, of course, covered that up, and there's good evidence. I've read these articles that they evidenced the cover up, and it was all kept hush hush. And
I'll tell you,
I think that's a very big deal. James MacDonald,
it's a huge deal.
James MacDonald is still just arrogantly denying it all. He's slandering these bloggers and saying that they're basically lowlives who have nothing better to do than to gossip. And I think James MacDonald has some pretty interesting wake up calls that are going to come his way here pretty soon.
Jimmy, you get so mired in sin and in darkness that you seriously can't see something?
I think you feel invincible. So James MacDonald is really good buddies with Mark Driscoll, and Mark Driscoll had the same exact accusations over at Mars Hill. So Mark Driscoll, he was verbally abusive to staff members. He would come in and he would F-bomb them and slam his fist down on the table and name call them. And so there were some people who were coming out of those meetings who were whistleblowers, and they were saying Mark Driscoll he's an arrogant jerk. And of course his public persona was he was the face of Mars Hill, and he was such a wonderful guy, and he was the poster child for marriage. He was writing all these books on marriage. Well, it turns out there was also a scandal. This was in 2000, late 16 or 17, where Mark Driscoll went out and purchased a whole bunch of his own books to push his book up to the number one seller on the New York Times list or whatever. And then, of course, his publisher dropped him, and I think they pulled the book all together. And it was just a series of events.
The lies. Just lie
absolutely.
After lie after lie after lie, and it snowballs.
But I think, to your question, I think what happens is what happens with abusers of all kinds is eventually they just feel like they're invincible, and they become more and more brazen. And the Bible speaks to that. Paul says in 1 Timothy 3:13, it's one of my favorite passages, Paul says, while evil people and imposters keep on going from bad to worse, deceiving and being deceived. So it's this idea that the more puffed up you get, the more prideful you get, the more arrogant you get, the more you get away with abusing people. The more you get away with it successfully, you get to this point where I think you just feel so invincible.
Nobody
and I think
can touch me.
I think James MacDonald right now,
yeah.
I think he's under the delusion that he's going to win every one of these lawsuits, and he's going to shut these people up for good, and he's going to be able to keep going on and doing his ministry and doing big things and living in his big mansion.
I am just so proud of the people who have been harmed, victims of abuse, who continue to steadfastly tell the truth, tell their story.
And it comes at a great cost, too.
It does.
And I think that's
it's not easy.
Julie Roys, I've read some of the stuff that James MacDonald has written about Julie Roys and some of the other bloggers, and
because
he's nasty
person, right? It will hit on that weaker person, and just slap them around to where it's so painful.
No, same with Siobhan O'Connor. I mentioned Siobhan in Buffalo. I was reading some articles today, just kind of browsing, and I mean, she was trashed. And I would love. I'm going to contact her and see about doing an interview on this podcast, because I'd love to hear.
Right.
That's a side of things that I think people don't think about often, and I think they think, oh, well, you know, they just go and they report and life goes on. Well, it doesn't work that way. I mean, your life is never the same, especially when you take on a big organization. You know, Rachel Denhollander, look at some of the attacks that she got.
Oh, yeah.
You have...
well, you become so very public
pick
all
anybody.
of a sudden, and you're under the microscope. And
yeah, but not just that. You're being attacked by the organization that you gave a black eye to. Well, it's not that you gave a black eye to them. It's just
you told the truth.
They dotted their own eye. But yeah, you speak up. You tell the truth. Siobhan O'Connor, you know, what happened with her is the Catholic Church, the diocese in Buffalo, they were publishing emails of her, you know, saying that she's deceitful, that she's a liar, that she has a history of being untruthful, and you know, they were doing everything that they could to discredit her.
Things like that, right?
And same thing with High Point. High Point did that to Jules.
I know, yeah.
And you know, they were digging pretty deep to try to find any dirt they could on her. And you know, they just get really ugly. But I think it's just pride, arrogance. Mm-hmm. They think they can get away with it because they have for so long.
Right.
So then finally, Sarah Smith of the Star-Telegram, she's not there anymore, but she was a reporter at the Star-Telegram, and she published an article on December 9th, releasing a bombshell investigation into the independent fundamental Baptist churches, where there were 412 allegations in 187 churches that spanned across 40 states and Canada.
That's crazy.
And she found that the vast majority of the pastors who were abusers are still in active ministry.
And that's heartbreaking.
They've been shuffled from church to church. They've not been removed. Victims have been silenced. They've been told that basically they need to find their place and shut up and go away.
I think this year is going to unfold so much greatness for victims of abuse.
Oh, I do too.
Of abuse.
Absolutely.
Really do.
So yeah, the point of this podcast, we just, you know, I was telling Mom, I'm going to call this, it's the tale of the tortoise and the hare. So all of this that happened in 2018 didn't happen overnight. It's not like we turned the corner into 2018 and then voila, you know, it's just all this, all these major bombshells are happening.
Yeah,
it didn't work that way. No. You know, this is the tale of the tortoise and the hare. People have been in the trenches for years, and I think it's finally coming to a head, and there's still a lot that needs to be done, and it can and it will be done. I think that each one of these accusers who we've mentioned today, again, these are just ones off the top of my head.
Right. Oh my goodness, there are many.
If I were to actually search, my memory's not that good. If I were to actually search, I think we could have filled 2 hours with stories like these. But every one of these accusers faced an uphill battle. Talk to any one of them. Listen to our podcast with Jules. Listen to my podcast with Sean, my interview with Sean. Every single one of these people faced an uphill battle, and they didn't think they'd be able.
Jimmy. They still are out there every day dealing with this. Every day.
But they, you know, a lot of them faced lawsuits, or they faced threats, or they were slandered in order to be discredited. But you know what? They persisted. And the result is that abusers who are in power are being removed. They're being fired. They're being put in prison. And I think the message is very loud and clear right now that there's no place for abusers in positions of power. And I think if we've gleaned anything from 2018, that's it.
It surely is.
There's no room in the church anymore
no.
for people who are in positions of power who are abusers. No. And there is still a mess of people who are in leadership positions who are abusers.
And I think we're going to see a lot of toppling.
I do too.
I really do.
I think one by one, person by person, these people are going to be outed and they're going to be removed.
They will be dethroned.
And we just want to encourage listeners to say, have the power and the stamina to come forward if you can, if you're able to.
Right.
I know some are not in a place where they can do that, and that's okay. That's perfectly okay. But I think we are positioned really nicely.
We are. Everybody just needs to remain calm, not get all hyper, which I don't see that happening. I see a calm, steady persistence. And that's what it takes, a chiseling away just at the truth to expose the truth.
Yeah.
Just that slow, steady, just constant.
Steady wins the race.
Yep, there you go.
So we'll end with our truth bomb, and our truth bomb is this, that if you've been working to expose evil and you feel burned out, slow down. This is not a race. And if you know the story, the hare doesn't cross the finish line first. Don't burn yourself out. Take your time, pace yourself. Steady wins the race. Keep trying and link arms with people who have done it successfully. Find camaraderie. Find other people who've done it successfully, link arms with them, and get help where you need help.
There's so much strength in that.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So we leave you on that note, and we thank you for tuning in. And man, I'm looking forward to what 2019 brings. It's going to be a wild year.
Absolutely, it is going to be a great year.
Very good. Well, thank you all for listening, and we'll catch you next episode. Oh, by the way, little plug.
Yeah.
Next week, we have Abby Fitzgerald Schwab from The Keepers, who's going to be our guest, and we're going to do an interview with her. You will not want to
miss that.
She's wonderful. Yeah. We absolutely love her, and hopefully a lot of you, if not most of you, have seen The Keepers on the Netflix. It's the Netflix series that is just phenomenal.
Yes,
so,
absolutely.
We're going to interview Abby next week, and I'm really looking forward to that. So until then, have a wonderful week. Thanks again for listening to today's episode of the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast. If you found it helpful, please follow on Spreaker, subscribe on Google Play Music, Apple Podcasts, or Stitcher. Share with your friends and tell the world. Join us in speaking out on sex abuse so we can change the tides and prevent abuse.